My Best Friends Live in the Woods. The Adventures of Albert by Anne Michelle Mracek. Chapter 31. Larissa Come Home. When Nicholas came through the front door, he was greeted with a rousing shout of "Surprise!" from his siblings. His shocked face made the group laugh out loud. "We thought you were Mama," Charlie laughed. Getting over the startle, his expression snapped back to serious. "We have a real problem," he announced, and everyone snapped to attention. "Larissa is missing," he told them, and they all gasped. "How do you know?" Marigold asked. "She ran ahead of us to go to the bunnies and never showed up. I doubled back to find her with no luck," he quickly explained. "Where's Mother?" he asked, looking around. "I sent her off to visit with Mother Dear." Marigold suddenly felt guilty at sending her away. Had her own ego placed her sister in danger? "I'll run and get her," Marigold said as she darted out the door, heading on a run for the Great Glen. Her heart was pounding as fear ran in her. Back at the cave, Nicholas continued. "What about Bluebell?" he asked. "Gone for lunch with Benjamin," Molly said, suddenly mad at her big sister for leaving them. "Then it's up to us," Nicholas said. "We need a plan," he said as he paced the kitchen floor. Just then, Albert burst in the door, the other boys in tow. "I decided you were right," Albert said to Nicholas as they poured in. "We spread out and each came home a different route," Albert explained. "No trace of her," Ricky said, puffing. He had been running down to the stream and back twice, thinking he might have missed her. Nicholas was deep in thought. "You know, I thought I heard her voice really far off, like in a dream," Nicholas shared. "I don't know if it means anything," he added, doubtful. "When and where?" Jillian stepped forward in alarm. Nicholas described the place and Jillian gasped. "The fairy place! Larissa's in great danger! We must all run there and call to her. If we can still hear her, she can still hear us. Her only hope is for us to call her back." Before she rushed out the door, she scribbled a quick note and left it hanging on the nail above the hearth. If Mother or Bluebell were to return, they needed to know where they were. "Everyone grab a basket," Jillian instructed as she put the flintstone in hers. "Gather sage, lots and lots of sage." They divided into two groups, each headed out to a sunny glen. The plan was to pick sage and meet at the fairy streamlet. Anthena was prancing about in the sunshine of the Great Glen, her parents laughing at her antics, when Marigold came charging up. "Mother, Mother!" she frantically screamed in a panic. Mother Dear heard the alarm in her voice and rushed to her. "She isn't here, Marigold," Mother Dear said, searching Marigold's face. "What has happened?" She instantly snapped to her full attention. "Larissa has been taken by the fairies," Marigold gasped. "We need Mother. Did she just leave?" Marigold's eyes were darting to find her. "Why, she hasn't been here at all." Mother Dear was now frightened. Everyone knew there wasn't much time for a rescue once the fairies had lured you in. Marigold sat down and started to cry. "But I sent her here this morning," she sobbed. Suddenly frightened, the fairies had taken Matilda as well. The Queen summoned Owl. "We have a true emergency," she told him. "Start the forest alarm." "Ooh, yes, Your Highness," he bowed. "What shall it say?" "Find Mother Skunk and bring her to the fairy place." "Ooh, yes, Your Highness." Owl wasted no time. He was already hooting the alarm to the great flocks of birds in the forest canopy. The top of every tree began to chirp the message, spreading with every wing in every direction. It was the great duty of the birds when the alarm was called. Only once or twice in a lifetime was the alarm sounded. Eyes on wings, looking down with purpose. It wasn't long before Mother Skunk was spotted, walking back from the beaver pond at a lazy trot. A swoop of sparrows all descended on her at once, chirping wildly. Mother Skunk suddenly realized this was an alarm, but they were all talking at once. "One at a time," she pleaded. Then Crow Teacher spotted her and flew in close. He motioned for the others to be silent. "Find Mother Skunk and bring her to the fairy place," he fatefully repeated and bowed. The bow told her it was a message from the Queen. "Oh, thank you," Mother Skunk said to the birds and rushed off. The fairy place was in the general direction of the bunnies, and as Mother ran, she began to put two and two together. Larissa was her daydreamer. She had gone with the boys to the bunnies. Somehow she must not have made it. Fear made her feet move faster. Her heart was pounding. She began to call out, "Larissa! Larissa!" hoping even at this distance she could somehow hear her. From the great glen, the Queen and Marigold began to race toward the fairy place as well. "Can I come?" Anthena pleaded. Her father stepped up. "No, it's too dangerous. You stay with me." Anthena was both disappointed and relieved. "I'll stay here and coordinate the efforts," he yelled to Clarissa as she and Marigold headed off. "Please be careful," he added. Owl flew back shortly. His sturdy, silent wings landed him just a few feet behind the stag. Owl bowed and said, "Your Majesty!" The great stag had his back to Owl and jumped at his voice. "Don't do that! I never hear you," he said, whirling around. Owl ignored this. It was his secret joke. He took a silly delight in making a sovereign jump. "Mother Skunk has been found and is headed to the fairy place," he reported. "Excellent work," the prince said, pleased. "Now, I have another job for you. Fly to the fairy place and see that Clarissa keeps her distance back from the stream. I can't have her lured in as well," he said quite seriously. Owl bowed. "As you wish," he hooted and silently lifted off. Albert had ignored the sage gathering and raced straight away to the fairy place. He knew seconds mattered and began calling at the top of his voice, "Larissa! Larissa! Come home!" He paused to listen, but hearing nothing, "Larissa! It's Albert! Come back! Come home!" "Larissa! Larissa!" he continued, then paused to listen. Still nothing. Then suddenly he thought he heard Larissa's voice say, "Albert, is that you?" Encouraged, he began again. "Larissa, it's Albert! Come home now! Come home!" he called. Larissa seemed to hear a far-off call from Albert in the back of her mind, almost a distant memory. "I think Albert needs me," she told Twinkle Blue and began to turn back in the direction they had come. "Oh, nonsense!" Twinkle Blue laughed. "He's not here," she chimed. "Look, daisies!" Twinkle Blue said to distract Larissa. Then again, Larissa heard his voice, but this time joined with Mother Skunk's. "Larissa, it's Mama! I need you to come home now!" She heard her desperate plea. "Larissa, it's Albert! Time to come home!" She was hearing them a bit more clearly now and frowned at her fairy temptress. "I'm going home now," Larissa said and turned to leave. Suddenly, 100 fairies were swarming in front of her like angry bees. "Stop it!" she cried out, swatting at them. But they were too fast and laughed at her efforts. "Larissa, it's Mother! Come home!" she heard again. This time Larissa called back. "I'm trying, Mother, but they're blocking my way!" she called, starting to panic. Back at the fairy place, Jillian had arrived with her other siblings, and they all heard Larissa's plea for help. "Sage!" Jillian ordered. As each child handed the contents of her basket to Jillian, she quickly twisted them into bundles. She made a pile of small sticks on top of the sitting rock and struck the flint stone. A small fire started, hesitant at first, but Jillian carefully blew on the flame, encouraging it into a nice little bonfire. As she placed the sage on top, it began to smoke. "Blow the smoke over the stream and call her name," Jillian instructed. Jillian started. She knelt, face even with the flames. She blew her breath, then called out in a loud voice, "Larissa, come home!" As she stepped aside, she motioned Mother Skunk to do the same. With each family member or friend that came forward and blew the sage smoke, the gray curls seemed to vanish in a haze above the stream. "Where's the smoke going?" Albert whispered to Jillian. "Into the fairy realm," she replied. On the other side, Larissa could hear the voices of each one as they called for her. With each breath of sage, one of her tormenting fairies began to yawn and slowly flutter to the ground in a deep sleep. And each time Larissa was able to take a step or two closer to where she had entered the fairy realm. "It's working!" Larissa called out. "Don't stop!" Jillian smiled, hearing Larissa's faint voice in her mind. "I can hear her," Jillian announced. "She says it's working. Don't stop." "Wonderful!" Mother Skunk lit up with renewed hope. They each took turn after turn. "Don't stop," Jillian encouraged. "If it takes all night, don't stop," she pleaded. No one had any intention of stopping, least of all Mother. Clarissa and Marigold had arrived, and even Owl took a turn. After an hour or so, Clarissa pulled Owl aside. "Best go back and give Matthew an update," she instructed. "He will be worried," she added, and Owl nodded and flew back toward the glen. As Owl landed in the great glen, this time the prince was watching for him. "Why are you here?" he asked, angered. "An update from the queen," Owl bowed. "But now she's there unprotected." His anger and frustration were obvious. Owl gave his update and hurried back to protect his queen. When he returned, he was relieved to see all was as he had left it. Suddenly, Jillian began to sing. It was as if she had fallen into a trance. The melody was beautiful, but the words were in a language none of them could understand. The sage smoke began to take the form of strange shapes, letters, and symbols, and drifted over the stream. They would sparkle for a brief instant, then vanish, one after another. Jillian's body began to weave side to side as the music in the strange language poured from her. Everyone gathered stood in stunned silence. Then they all heard Larissa's voice. "I'm almost home! Don't stop!" Mother Skunk called out, "Larissa, it's Mama! Come home!" Then everyone saw it. Larissa's faint outline walking up the stream toward them. You could see her, but you could also see through her to the background of stream and ferns behind her. They all shouted at once at the top of their lungs, "Larissa, come home!" And suddenly she was standing in front of them, solid and whole, her feet in the wet bog. Larissa took a gasp of air and looked at the gathering of loved ones around her. She held out her hands and looked at them as if to convince herself she was really there, in body, present. Mother Skunk lunged toward her, grabbed her in her arms, and ran with her to dry ground. The instant her feet hit solid earth, Jillian's trance was broken, and she collapsed, exhausted. Albert ran to Jillian as the others encircled Larissa and Mother. "How can I help?" Albert scooped her up and felt her body going limp. "Help!" Albert cried out, and suddenly all eyes whirled to see Jillian limp in Albert's arms. "No!" Mother Skunk cried out. "Jillian, stay with me!" she screamed. Slowly, Jillian opened her eyes as if it were a great weight she was lifting. "Stay with me!" Mother pleaded. All right. Jillian's voice was barely audible. Albert began to carry her home to the cave. About halfway home, they met Bluebell and Benjamin in a mad dash, running full tilt toward the fairy place. Seeing Larissa on Mother's arm, they cheered with relief. But everyone's eyes were solemn, and they all looked over to Albert. He was cradling a limp Jillian, tears running down his cheeks. Bluebell and Benjamin exchanged a terrified glance, and then Benjamin ran to Albert. He got his arms under Jillian's legs and took half her weight. Their eyes met, and they silently carried Jillian toward home. The sisters all ran ahead. We need to set up a sickbed by the hearth, Marigold was instructing. Get the mats Mother uses for company. As they were scurrying about, they had set up 2 sick beds. The one closest to the fire for Jillian and the other nearby for Larissa, in case she needed it. They were wringing their hands and looking for something else to do when Mother pushed the door open for Benjamin and Albert. They carried Jillian and put her on the mats her sisters had prepared for her. Mint tea! Bluebell shot her command to her sisters. Bluebell lifted Jillian's head onto her lap and brought the tea to her lips. Just a sip, she encouraged. Jillian was able to drink a couple of swallows. I'll sit up with her, Bluebell told the family. So will I, Mother said, and no one argued, knowing it would be pointless. Larissa was terrified. She knelt on the floor next to Jillian's head and kissed her sister's forehead. Please don't leave, she pleaded. I'm so sorry. I'll never leave again, she promised. Larissa was also exhausted. As she kissed Jillian's forehead again, Bluebell looked down at her sister. Suddenly she gasped. What? Larissa said wide-eyed. Your eyelashes, Bluebell exclaimed. They're blue! It was a long night. Bluebell's head would nod forward, but she would force herself to jerk back to attention. The leg where Jillian's head was resting fell asleep and began to pain her. Let me take a turn, she heard. Looking up, she saw Marigold standing in front of her. She didn't argue, and they carefully traded places. Each time Jillian would stir, they gave her more sips of mint tea. The sisters had all taken turns cradling their sister. As daybreak came, it seemed the worst was over, and Jillian's eyes began to blink open. She looked up to see Bluebell once again cradling her head. Were you there all night? Jillian asked faintly. Bluebell smiled down at her sister. No, we all took turns. I'm hungry, Jillian said and tried to sit up. Dizziness quickly overtook her. Not so fast, Bluebell said, easing her back down. Baby steps, she encouraged. Benjamin was getting a cool towel and came over to place it on Jillian's forehead. That feels nice, Jillian said, trying to smile. Just rest, Mother patted her hand. Benjamin and Albert stepped outside and were seated across from one another on the meeting logs. Albert finally just had to ask. When are you going to ask Bluebell to marry you? He blurted out. Well, that was direct. Benjamin shifted uncomfortably on his log. But since you asked, I was going to ask her last night. I had it all planned. I was going to ask Mother Skunk for her hand with all the family gathered around for dinner. But when we got back to the cave, everyone was gone and there was a note tacked to the hearth, so we just ran. The rest is history, he told Albert. Albert nodded. Now, with Jillian so sick, her full attention is on her sister, as it should be, he added. Albert nodded again. Well, soon, Albert said, looking directly at Benjamin. Soon, Benjamin nodded. A few days passed, and Jillian's sparkle began to return. Her appetite slowly improved, and Mother delighted in making her favorite dishes to tempt her. What overtook you? Molly asked Jillian at lunch one afternoon. I have no idea, Jillian admitted. It just happened. Then there was a knock at the front door, and Layla trotted over to answer it. It was the great stag. He had come to check on Jillian's progress. I came to see how you were feeling. The stag smiled at Jillian. Seems like you are truly the chosen priestess by the forest spirit, he said to her with reverence. Jillian just nodded. I was thinking of canceling the lantern walks from now on, he continued, in light of recent events, he added. Oh no, don't do that! Jillian's eyes grew wide. The fairies mean us no harm. They just don't know any better. They can flit back and forth between worlds with little effort. They just don't understand why we can't, she tried to explain. They just want to play, she added, pleading her case. Larissa stepped up to reinforce Jillian. The fairy that drew me in was named Twinkleblue. She really didn't try to hurt me. She just wanted me to stay and play. The stag looked between the girls. Well, I will think on your advice, he answered, but did not make a commitment. I've been thinking we should postpone the crowning ceremony one full moon, the prince continued. We want you fully recovered, priestess. And the second fitting for the purple clothes still needs to be scheduled, he added, smiling at Mother Skunk. We've waited years. One more moon won't hurt, he smiled. Thank you, Jillian agreed. Then it's settled. The prince turned to leave, paused, then turned back and did a bow to Jillian. True priestess, he said, and stepped out. Chapter 31. Larissa, Come Home. Discussion and questions. Communication and talents. In the event of a true emergency, the family and the entire forest community work together to resolve the problem. There is a system of communication in place that is activated. Question 1. Who are the people in your life you can count on in an emergency? Question 2. How will you communicate and coordinate with the people who are there to assist in times of emergency? Jillian's special talents and gifts as priestess surface when the need arises. Question 3. In an emergency, what are your special talents and gifts you can offer? I am the composer and performer for all the music in this video. Both audio recordings and the printed scores are available on mybestfriendsliveinthe.woods.com. I will provide the link below. The painted illustrations are also my creation. Prints are available on mybestfriendsliveinthe.woods.com. This is a novel. The chapters are meant to be heard in the order in which they were written. And while each chapter can stand alone, they do build as new characters are introduced and past events are referred to. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe. The chapters are numbered, so if you're just joining us, be sure to go back and watch from Chapter 1